Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we're playing Paladin on a Monday after the daily reset. And this time, we even have a lot of variety, I would say, although, word of warning for those that care. About half the duties in this set are from Dawntrail, and the first two duties are near the end of the story, so timestamp to skip those. With that said, for duty 1, we have Alexandria, and our healer just has a bad day, to say the least. On the first boss, they get sniped out with the first foreign entity removal, so do we have the power to continue? Probably. I tried to help a bit with clemency and intervention, but after the second stack marker, our Viper with a Vuln stack and low HP needs help to survive the raid wide, and my greed causes their death. A second too late. Alright, 1 DPS it is then. And they can even survive the stack marker alone somehow, so we've got this, except then the machinist gets a Vuln stack. As the final stack marker appears, I'm ready to cover them and even hallowed ground just in case, as we just have to live a few more seconds to win, but the boss goes down first. On the second boss, our poor healer forgets to look out for the line AoEs while focusing too hard on the triangle AoE, and I can't help them in time. On the bright side, they took it with some humor. On the last boss, in terms of Paladin tricks, due to the intermission ending where I had my entire filler section set up, I choose to start with that part instead of finishing with it. As long as there are no other raid buffs to catch, the order doesn't really matter. That of course means that I start with my Supplication, Holy Spirit and Sepulture, and then do the blades. With that said, as we make our way through, things are going well enough, but you may recall in a previous episode I highlighted this particular mechanic combination. Subroutine with partition, donut AoE followed by a line AoE, where I said the partition is quietly happening under the more flashy attacks. Well, this time the line AoE sniped our healer, right as the fight was ending too. Despite everything, I think we still cleared the duty reasonably quickly. For duty 2, we went to Everkeep, and since the other tanks seemed very eager to main tank, I of course let them. I get the impression our damage might be a bit low, or maybe my expectations are high. In phase 1, it seems the mechanics that loop if you take too long are the looping blades, the front and back cleave, and Calamity's Edge, a raid wide. Among these, the looping blades seem to be by far the biggest issue. A majority of the party died at some point or another, either directly from those blades or from the Vuln stacks provided by those blades, causing the follow-up raid wide to take them down. However, despite how concerning the phase 1 performance looks, we had no deaths in phase 2. Many times we had players drop very low or nearly die, whether it was from just straight damage or from Vuln stacks empowering an attack, yet no one died. I also felt like I got a ton of use out of both Divine Veil, Reprisal and Interventions, both use on my co-tank but also use on other players as needed, whether it was for damage reduction to even out Vuln stacks or for the healing it can provide. Amazingly, no one died to the blade warps either, so a very impressive performance overall I would say, if we ignore the disaster in phase 1. For duty 3, we went to the Limitless Blue Extreme against Bismarck. We but recently managed to beat this fight with only 3 players synced. With some echo, sure, but still. But the fact that the hardest part of this fight with a low player count is the various DPS checks and not some complicated mechanic means that I'm pretty confident we can do this quite easily. The important differences from normal to extreme is that 1. You take increasingly more damage from standing on its back, which can accumulate between sets. 2. The serpents put debuffs on players that mean you should attack a specific color, however, it seems you can overcome this and ignore it somewhat. Weird. 3. The ad phases later in the fight are stronger, and 4. The different withers are more punishing. Aside from this, it is pretty much the same fight. The ads being stronger in general in the fight also means that sometimes the dragon killers are available while ads are on the field. And if you leave them alone, they start attacking the island, so with low enough damage, this could become a problem. With that said, in the Serpent phase, I got very confused, because I would assume if I had the wrong debuff, I would do basically no damage to the Serpent I had, but it seems my damage was mostly unaffected. However, I was taking quite a beating. That said, we still made it through, and once one of the Serpents die, both debuffs go away. The Turbulence debuff that makes it more painful to stand on Bismarck usually goes away before your second opportunity to get on, but will carry over to the third. Now, since we had good damage, the ad phase after the serpents was also no issue, and we get the yellow weather, which means there will be a knockback and a donut AoE. We also need to make sure we kill the vapor bubbles, as otherwise they can swing at you to prevent you from using the dragon killers in time. Luckily, no one dies from the knockbacks, and we get back on Bismarck. I would be incredibly surprised if we got it down in one round with a random group like this. However, there is a fifth difference from normal to extreme. When Bismarck shakes you off on its own, well, it's not like it will aim you at the island, logically speaking. So, down to 3 players we go. Just enough to win anyway. We even have a Pictomancer with great burst, so this will probably be fine, right? In the meantime, we get the purple weather, meaning lightning strikes. There'll be some lightning strikes so spread out, but even bigger lightning strikes will hit the vapor bubbles, so we should not hurt those. Since we were lacking in players, the dragon killers also become available before the ads are down. But the time it takes from shooting the dragon killers till Bismarck is attackable was enough to clear things up. We also had most of the raid back on their feet by that point, and since only 3 of us survived to see the previous set, only 3 of us has Turbulence 3. If the damage is too great, you can also always just wait out the debuff before jumping on, but that does cost nearly 50% of the attacking opportunity, so maybe not if we're so close to winning. Hilarious midsection, I have to say, but we still did it first try. For duty 4? No, really, we have Limitless Blue Hard, or Normal. On our first opportunity on its back, one of our healers didn't realize they had to get on, so both me and the other healer let them know about this, which indeed resolves later. For the Serpent section, my co-tank disconnects, but stays in the game just long enough to hold the Serpent. This could have been much more disastrous if they had disconnected like a minute prior. This time, we also have the purple weather. However, we forget to spread out properly for the second wave, leading to our samurai dying. That said, we beat Bismarck right then. Much easier, of course. But, for the record, despite all the chaos in the extreme attempt, it only took 40 seconds longer to beat. For duty 5, we went to Tower of Zod, which is a very awkward level for Paladin. Just enough to have Holy Sheltron, but just shy of having healing on your spell attacks. However, our healer was excellent, which is very good, since our Pictomancer was having quite a rough time. On the pack just before the first boss, the Dragoon got hit by a telegraph that gave them heavy, and the healer immediately used the Shuna as the fight wrapped up. Yes, that's the obvious choice, but often I feel it takes a bit before someone would actually do this. On the second boss, our Pictomancer gets sniped by the confusion mechanics twice, and the second time I decide to intercept the now unavoidable AoE with cover. On the final AoE pack before the final boss, which is known to be quite brutal, I gradually work through every single cooldown I have. Unfortunately, Hallowed Ground was on cooldown from me using it on a pack before the second boss, where perhaps it wasn't needed. On the final boss, our Pictomancer's unlucky with dodging mechanics, which leads to a very sudden death when Cinderuva's Samsara overlaps with a dot tick to take the Pictomancer from about 2/3 of their HP down to 0. Bosses like these, where sometimes you get forced to step away to avoid mechanics, are also very interesting from the perspective of a Paladin specifically, since you have precisely the toolkit to work around that, which the other tanks don't really have. That said, I do think the more interesting part to deal with in this dungeon are the AoE pulls, especially the last few that can get quite hectic. For duty 6, we went to the Fractal Continuum, a very strange duty. All 3 bosses also get quite unique with their mechanics. For the first boss, it pretty much just does 3 things: a raid wide, a tank buster, and pairwise quarter room AoEs overlapping with circle AoEs. This means that the fight gets repetitive extremely fast if you have no trouble with the mechanics. What I mean by this is, if you've ever seen me or someone else solo a boss in a dungeon, at some point, the boss reaches a stage where it just loops a few mechanics, and if the boss is incapable of overwhelming you with that, you've already won. A lot of the time when soloing bosses synced, this stage happens at maybe around 70% HP, give or take. Given this boss has so few mechanics, a normal-sized group will also have this experience. It is quite strange in a normal duty like this. Now, the hallways after the first boss are also quite interesting, because they do let you pull nearly everything up to the next boss room if you like. But you might not actually want to do that. This is both because the mobs are strong enough to overpower tanks, maybe not a warrior because raw intuition, but several of the mobs also have raid wights, and those can kill the rest of the group if there are too many of them. If you were allowed to pull everything, there would also be a Chimera in the bunch, which will cast Ram's Voice and Dragon's Voice, but can be interrupted and stunned. The second boss is a classic Minotaur with the coin counter combat style. Frontal cone swipe, frontal cone line, circle AoE. It also has a dash that pushes players around, which can put them in an awkward spot for the frontal cone line. But the really interesting mechanic is that at some point, the boss will start to charge up a full room AoE that you cannot avoid. To stop it, you have to distract it by opening one of the cages in the room and let another mob into the fight. The mob will momentarily fight the boss, and when eaten, the boss heals and gains a buff. For example, this one gives it piercing resistance. Awkward considering both our Bard and our Red Mage's physical attacks are actually piercing. Anyway, it did not really affect our ability to proceed. The final boss also has an interesting gimmick where it fills in tiles to restrict your movement. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that much with it. It lights up tiles so they're dangerous to step on until all of them explode after a while. It puts down mines randomly that explode after a while. Neither of these mechanics restrict your movement enough to really become a problem unless perhaps you ignore the ads that light up tiles as well. I do really like this kind of boss though, that plays with space in this way. For duty 7 and 8, we go to Dawntrail raid bosses, timestamp to skip if you like. That said, we went to Honey Be Lovely. Since my co-tank already had their stance on, and also had more HP than me, I just let them go for it first. Something a bit funny right at the start was that when we got the double tank busters, my co-tank moved extra far away from me just in case. Incidentally, we had almost the exact angle between each other as I do when I do the Savage version of this fight, and this mechanic happens. The fact that all future tank busters in this fight, my co-tank does not move so far away tells me they expected the wider cone. In the first beat phase, we all managed to perfectly dodge the hearts and not get infatuated, which was amazing. However, in the second beat, first my co-tank gets a third heart, which hurts a lot if it gets stopped right next to the source, and right as that issue wraps up, I get my third heart and end up in a similarly awkward position. Despite that, somehow no deaths, and we make it to the end. Oh, also, turned out the Red Mage knew me. Hello. For duty 8, I'm a 15-minute replacement against Wicked Thunder. I just want to open this one with saying, I have no idea why they needed replacements in the first place. I'm guessing they wiped and players left, but everyone were playing decently well. This is also a fight where Paladin's capacity to step away for one GCD, sometimes more, can be immensely helpful for uptime. You may see me just eating the AoEs just before she removes parts of the arena, but honestly, I don't think I would feel comfortable doing this as a DPS unless I was like actively out-healing it with something like Bloodbath. I'm a lot more okay with it as a tank, especially main tank, because the damage hardly matters. Cardia and Holy Sheltron seems to outpace it without issue. Speaking of that massive cannon, I'm sure most players have no major issues with it, but for those that do, for the multifold blasts, even on a good connection, you kinda have to move into the safe spot before the animation for the previous blast has finished, which might seem weird. Another tip is in how to remember when she doubles down on a specific side. The way I do it is that I only keep track of which number of blasts she doubles down, and where we start. So for example, the first blast will be on the right, so I go left. Then she shows second blast is left, then she shows third blast is left, so I memorize double on the second, and then see fourth blast is right. I only have to remember that she doubles down on the second blast, and otherwise I just alternate from my starting position. To demonstrate again for the 5-fold blast, she starts left, so I go right. She goes right, left, left, double on the third, right. Now, the fact I got hit anyway is besides the point, I was just too slow to move. Later in the fight, during the Witch Hunt mechanic, in retrospect, I should have started my burst with the melee parts, Goring Blade, Supplication, Sepulture, but I made the mistake of doing not that. It sort of worked out, but was a lot scarier as a result. As a result of her starting such a long mechanic sequence close to the 20% mark, also meant that we almost skipped the final desperation phase. Almost, although it led to this hilarious glitchy thing at the end. For duty 9, we wind down today's set of duties with the Guildhest, Shadow and Claw. Hey, did you know the boss is one level above the players? Well, I discovered this just now because my Riot Blade missed. Anyway, nothing else of interest happened here. And finally for duty 10, once again, all's well that ends in the well. Given how many times I've done this duty as, not the tank, it never occurred to me that I could just pull more. Like, there are no walls here, I could pull everything. My motivation to hold it with the pulling is 1. The Ninja and Astrologian don't have any AoE anyway, so it is just me and the Bard. And 2. Some of the mobs pacify, stopping everyone's attacks except the Astrologian. And some of the mobs can silence, which could mean I just flat out die from no healing. No reason to exert myself and get in such danger for such a small gain. With that said, a very nice and varied session this time. I think it was particularly hilarious to get Bismarck, and then easier Bismarck, although I guess it would have been almost more cinematic if it had been in reverse. Somewhat recently, I did a stream of beating Bismarck Extreme and Ravana Extreme synced with as few players as possible. And it turned out the answer is 3 for both of them. With some echo, of course. If you're curious how that looks and goes, I'll put a link to that stream in the description. I call it Extreme Countdown, and I hope to see you on the streams one day. It may be easy to catch the streams if you join the Discord server as well, as it comes with notifications that you can opt into for exactly that. Anyway, it does seem to work decently well to queue after the daily reset, although, as was seen last time as Dancer, your mileage may vary. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, in Stormblood, not only was Requiescat's damage physical, meaning it benefited from fight or flight, which only boosted physical damage at the time, but it only boosted magic potency by 20% compared to Shadowbringer's 50%. But not only that, back in Stormblood, your only attack spell was Holy Spirit, and Requiescat did not make spells instant, which meant that Paladin, indeed, had a mage section in their rotation where they actually stood there, casting Holy Spirit 5 times in a row.